Hola, me llamo Marisa Gutierrez, and this is my language and culture contact presentation number 1. So here's a quick overview of what I did. I usually split things into half-an-hour increments, that way you could fully absorb what was going on. So for the first week, I watched an hour of television. The second week, I did my Spanish Lab videos and podcasts. The third week, I did an hour of watching Tarzan. And then the last week, I did some reading. So, for the first half hour, I watched a cooking show, Cocinemos Juntos, which means we cook together. And really, this felt like a Spanish version of Rachel Ray. Everything seemed very similar to the cooking shows that I watch in English. The recipes were a little different. Sopa de camarón con chili pasilla, shrimp soup with chilies, and biscuit con mermelada de fresa, a biscuit with strawberry marmalade. And then they had these pepetorias, which really look like gift baskets to me. So for cultural nuances, there were a lot of similarities, bright colors in the background. Everyone was very expressive, and they had playful banter. Like they talked about mantequilla, making sure there was enough butter in the biscuits to make them flaky. Something that was different, though, she didn't talk to the camera as much and to the viewer. She talked to the guests and the other people in the room, so it kind of felt like you were in the room with them. Background music was pretty similar in layers like piano and singing or mariachi music. Something that was different was that the guest would often teach her instead of her teaching the guest or teaching the viewer. And of course, they weren't afraid to be silly. Everything was very fun. As for things that I learned, I knew a lot of words. Most of the Spanish I know before this class was food. So I knew a lot of food that they were talking about, like fresas, strawberries. And I recognized some numbers like the cooking time and the measurement, so I could get a basic idea of what was going on. Not sure I could exactly recreate the recipe that they did, though. Some new words were listo, are you ready, and claro, of course. The second half of that first week, I watched some news, Telemundo. News they covered, again, very similar to the channels like Fox. They talked about bad winter weather, bar fights, Awatuki students, which I ended up seeing on Facebook the next day. They talked about people getting Cardinals haircuts. Again, this was a few weeks ago. Everything was very similar. It's very dramatic. There were similar shots of landscapes and people milling about. They kind of had the same newscaster talk and demeanor. They moved through every story very fast, preview what's to come. Something that was a little different, though, was that when they would talk to someone on the street, half of the time they would be speaking in English and half the time they would be speaking in Spanish. And then some things that I heard were about clouds and cold, today's dollar. Little note on commercials when I was watching this first hour. Some of the commercials were in English, some of them were in Spanish, and some of them were in Spanish with random pieces where people would talk in English, which I thought was a little different and interesting. Voiceovers were very enthusiastic, even to the point of being cheesy. There was a coloring book for adults, which I guess was supposed to be a relaxer, but kind of cheesy. For the second week, I watched the My Spanish Lab videos, and I'm sure many other people did. With that first video about the family in the car, it felt very much like a stereotypic American family. The brother and sister were fighting. They're in the car. We there yet? I need to use the bathroom. And the daughter flirted with the bad boy mechanic. Some translations I had learned were just very everyday talking things like que bien and verdad. As for the videos about speaking to patients in Spanish, something that I thought was interesting was that there was a range of accents. Some people had Hispanic accents, some people had no accent, some people even had Southern accent. They were talking about speaking in Spanish. And something that really stuck out to me was something that a person said was when you're talking to a Spanish patient, try to do what you're comfortable with. Try to get across what you will appropriately be able to convey and make sure that they understand. But when you need to, get an interpreter. When you have an interpreter, make sure you're still talking to the patient and not at the interpreter, and then the interpreter talks to the patient. Second half, I listened to podcasts, talked about a lot of similar everyday things that you'd hear in America. Do boys and girls read the same story? They talk about painting her house and feng shui. concerts, food, superstition, same kind of superstitious thing like black cats and Friday the 13th. And turns out, yes, at least the people in the podcast were superstitious. Some things that I learned were es muy interesante, very interesting. They talked about colors in painting her house, so blue, gray, white, so on. And talking about food, and they said conserva, which means preserve, and mercado, which means market. And then for the last one, when they talked about, when there was a little girl talking about activities that she does after school, and one thing that she said was some days she's libre, which means free. She doesn't have swimming or anything. For the third week, I took advice from my dialogue partner, and I watched something that I know very well in English, so I decided to watch Tarzan in Spanish with English subtitles, so it's very easy for me knowing the words already in English and having the subtitles to connect a lot of words together. Something that I thought was interesting was that they took very literal translations, like there's a song, You'll Be in My Heart, and he was singing En Mi Corazón. At one point in time, when Tantor the elephant is scared, her mom says, Está bien, ciela, which in English it said, the translation was, it's fine, honey, but when I looked up ciela, it was a term of endearment that meant like heaven or sky, which I thought was pretty cute. A lot of the sound effects were the same, and just this last point, the song Son of Man, which I always liked, in Spanish is Hijo de Hombre, and I had that stuck in my head for like a week after I watched this. And then the last week I did some reading. I went on the CDC and I looked up some fact sheets on vaccines, and then I went to choosemyplate.gov because I am going to be a nutritionist, and I looked up some other fact sheets in Spanish on there. So a lot of these said, lo que usted necesita saber, what you need to know about the certain topic. And one thing I'd like to point out is that on all of these fact sheets, they always use usted, and the verb conjugation, they always use the usted version, not the tu version. In the hepatitis A fact sheet, they talked about different conditions, like menudo, often you'll have these signs and symptoms, or a veces, you'll need to do something, and so on. One thing, when I was reading the hepatitis A fact sheet, that I noticed was los hombres que tienen relaciones sexuales con hombres. I was like, hombres and hombres, men, sexuales. And so I went and I looked at the English translation, and on the English version it literally said men who have sex with men, so very literal translation there. In the English version it also said if you're having a severe allergic reaction, call 911. In Spanish it said call a doctor or go to a doctor immediately, which is a little different. And then on the Choose My Plate fact sheets, I read things about calories, about dairy products, about fruits, and all of these had consejos, which they'd be like 10 consejos, so 10 different advice or tips for this certain topic. One phrase that I think would be important for me to know because I use it a lot in my practice, un estilo de vida saludable, a healthy lifestyle, and also bocadillos, which is snacks. Something that I thought was very interesting was in the English version of reducing calories, it said reduce fatty meats like ribs, sausage, bacon, and hot dogs. In Spanish, it said reduce fatty meats like chorizo, bacon, and salchichas, which is sausage. And I thought it was very good that they put chorizo on there because you want to make sure that you're having topics and food that is relevant to the culture that you're talking to. So some overall thoughts is there's a lot of cultural nuances, but there's also a lot of similarities, like flirting with the bad boy mechanic. And there's also a lot of very literal translations. So it's not as scary as some people may think. It's very easy if you pick out certain words and you can make those little translations and those cognates that sound the same in English and Spanish to at least briefly, like very at a low level, understand what's going on. And I think that if someone was a Spanish speaker who's trying to learn English, they could use similar methods. They could listen to the news in English, or they could watch a movie that they know very well in English, and then just have the Spanish subtitles or something. So it works both ways, and I'm very interested to continue with this project and learn more. Thank you.